The first thing Mara Bond noticed about the girl was that she was bleeding light. Not blood, not exactly. The fluid that seeped from the gash along the stranger's collarbone was luminescent, faintly blue-white, the color of a screen left on in an empty room. It caught the neon from the pharmacy sign above them and scattered it in directions neon had no business going. Mara stood very still on the sidewalk with her briefcase in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other, watching the girl slide off the overturned motor scooter and try very badly to stand. She was young. That was the second thing. Maybe 20, maybe less. Hard to tell under the grime and the way pain rewrote a face. Her jacket was wrong. Not wrong unfashionable, but wrong in the way a drawing of a jacket would be wrong. The seams going places seams didn't go. The material shifting color as she moved through the light. Her eyes, when she finally looked up, were the same blue-white as the wound. Okay, Mara said, mostly to herself. She'd been an accountant for 11 years. She did taxes for small businesses and the occasional estate. She was 34 years old, and she had, up until approximately 43 seconds ago, believed that the most interesting thing she'd ever do was find a $7,000 discrepancy in a restaurant group's payroll that saved them from an audit. She had not, at any point in those 11 years, developed a policy for what to do when a girl from another planet fell off a scooter in front of her outside a 24-hour pharmacy on Gellert Street. You need to move, the girl said. Her voice had an accent Mara couldn't place, something clipped and formal, like someone who'd learned English from a textbook and then had the textbook argued with her. You need to not be here. They are coming. Who is coming? The Gaudier things. The girl was on her feet now, one hand braced against the brick wall, the other pressed to the wound. Please, I am not able to protect you and run simultaneously. I am only rated for one of those things currently. Mara looked down the street. The city at 2 in the morning had its own kind of quiet. Cab horns a few blocks over, a bar closing, the hiss of a bus route running empty. She looked at the girl, at the blue-white light leaking between her fingers. Then she heard the engine. Not a car engine. She'd heard enough car engines. This was lower and wetter, a sound like a large animal breathing through water, and it came from a '59 Chevrolet rolling around the corner with its headlights off. 3 figures inside. One of them was already leaning out the window. Okay, Mara said again and grabbed the girl's arm. Come on. She did not know the city well. She knew the blocks between her apartment and her office, the route to the grocery store, the parking structure on Feher Street where she left her car on late nights. She knew the alley behind the pharmacy because she'd once chased an escaped page of a tax return down it in February and felt deeply stupid the entire time. She pulled them into it now and didn't feel stupid at all. The girl's name, she said, was Lila. She said it like she was reading it off a form, Layla Deluxe. And when Mara asked if Deluxe was a family name, she said the concept of family names on Ultra Terra was more complicated than she currently had the energy to explain. They were crouched behind a dumpster. Mara had her briefcase pulled across her chest, like a shield, which was ridiculous, and her heart was beating at a rate she was going to have to think about later, when she had time. What do they want? Mara asked. Me specifically, the information I carry. Lila lifted the hem of her jacket. Under it, against the skin of her ribs, something was embedded. Not surgically, or not clumsily surgically, but with the confidence of technology that had worked out all its complications. A flat disc, dark metal, patterned with markings that seemed to shift when Mara looked at them directly. Survey data. 3 years of mapping your solar system. Your star's outputs. Your planet's resource profile. Mineral concentrations. Water table depths. Atmospheric composition. Population distribution. Strategic. Stop. Mara held up a hand. Her accounting brain was already filing this under columns it didn't have names for. Asset inventory. Due diligence. Acquisition preparation. They're making a case for taking the planet. Layla looked at her with those flat, luminous eyes, and something moved across her face that might have been reassessment. Yes, the Gautier Construct and its handlers have been commissioned to retrieve the survey record. If they bring it home intact, the acquisition board convenes within 40 days. And if they don't get it, the case cannot be made without the record. The board requires verifiable data. They do not move on conjecture. A pause. Your species produces a great deal of conjecture. I had not expected you to understand. I file taxes for a living, Mara said. I know what it means when someone is building a file on you. Tires scraped on wet asphalt somewhere close. A door opened and did not close. Lila's head turned with a precision that wasn't human. The way a security camera moved without the drift of muscles making a decision. 2 of them have exited. Werner von Toller will approach from the east because that is how he is calibrated. He cannot innovate. Renault will loop wide and flush. She glanced at Mara. You should leave now. Go north. Stay in lit areas. What happens to you if I do? A very long pause. Long enough that Mara heard the second set of footsteps start, slow and patient, from the west. I will be retrieved, Lila said, and the survey record with me. Mara thought about that. She thought about it with the same part of her brain that spotted the restaurant group's discrepancy, the part that ran the numbers forward all the way to the end and looked at what was sitting there. Come on, she said. The thing about Werner von Toller was that he moved like something learning to walk from a manual. Not badly. The mechanics were competent, but there was a blankness to it, a motorized patience, the kind you saw in certain contractors who billed by the hour and had no stake in the outcome. Mara saw him enter the alley behind them as they went over the chain-link fence at the far end, and she saw the way he didn't rush, didn't change pace, just put one foot in front of the other toward where they'd been. He was wearing a suit. That detail stuck with her, the kind of suit you wore to a deposition. Lila landed the fence better than she should have, given the wound. She made a sound in her throat that wasn't a word in any language Mara knew, and then she straightened and pointed toward the parking structure. The vehicle, Lila said. You drive. How did you know I had a car? The key outline in your jacket pocket, the specific calluses on your right hand from a wheel, the fine. Come on. The parking structure at night was its own country. Concrete smell, orange lights that made everything look like old footage, the creak of the building settling. Mara's footsteps echoed. She counted the floors by memory, 3 up, Bay 14, and tried not to think about what she was carrying in her briefcase or what the woman running beside her was carrying in her rib cage. They will have the exits monitored within 6 minutes, Layla said, keeping pace. Their response templates are efficient. The Gautier Construct designed them. What is the Gautier Construct exactly? A biophysicist, or was? The original Gautier was a man, obsessive, brilliant, interested in the limits of consciousness. He designed a procedure that transferred his pattern into a vessel that does not decay. A beat. It has made him more patient than is comfortable for anyone else. How long has he been running this procedure? 91 years. Mara unlocked the car without the fob. By touch in the dark, found the door handle at the exact right height. 11 years of the same car in the same parking spot. She knew every rattle. She knew the way the driver's side door needed a firm pull to close all the way, and the way the engine turned over twice before it caught. She knew these things, and that was the only reason she was in the driver's seat when the headlights of the Chevrolet swept across the entrance ramp. Hold on, she said. She would not afterward describe herself as a good driver. She was a functional driver. She drove like she did most things, carefully, with attention to the variables, not especially flashy. She knew the streets she knew, and she stuck to them. The Chevrolet was faster. That wasn't in question. It had whatever the Gautier Construct had installed under its hood, and it ran like something with a grievance, close and persistent. But the construct's people navigated like they were following a map that had been drawn by someone else. And they didn't know this city the way Mara knew the 11 blocks between her apartment and her office. She ran a red on Wasserhelyi Street and took the left onto Gott that only locals used because the signage was misleading. In the rearview mirror, the Chevrolet slowed at the intersection, recalculating. Beside her, Leela had braced one hand on the dashboard and was watching the mirrors with that camera-precise focus. That was effective, she said. I just need enough time to think. You have been thinking since the alley. I've been reacting since the alley. That's different. Mara took another left, putting them on a long straightaway toward the river. Room to breathe. The survey record. Everything they need to move on us is in that disk. Yes. And without it, the case can't be made. The board requires verifiable data. It is their safeguard against overreach. An acquisition not supported by survey is overruled by, so if the record is gone, the whole process stops. Layla turned to look at her. If the record is destroyed, yes. The data cannot be resurveyed within the relevant time frame. The resource window your planet represents will close before a new survey could be commissioned. And you're carrying it in your ribs. I was carrying it out of the system. I planned to deliver it to a review body that would contest the acquisition. That is no longer. The scooter accident was not planned. No, I got that. Mara was quiet for a moment. Can you get the disk out? The extraction procedure requires tools I do not have. But you could transmit the data in the disk? Transmit it wrong? Corrupt it somehow? A pause. The river came into view ahead of them, white and black, the bridge lit in amber. I don't understand. I find errors in records for a living, Mara said. I know what a file looks like when it has been altered. I know what a file looks like when the alterations are designed to not be found. She glanced in the rearview mirror. The Chevrolet had found them again, 3 blocks back, headlights cutting across the cross street. If the survey record looks intact but the data inside it is corrupted past use, would the board know? Lila was very still. The board reviews the record's authentication signature, she said slowly. Not the data itself. The signature is machine verified. If the data were altered but the signature maintained, she stopped. The authentication is tied to the disk itself. If someone with access to the disk's internal architecture knew where the data segments were stored and could overwrite them with false coordinates, false readings, false atmospheric values, while leaving the container structure intact. Another stop. They would need to understand the filing system. Show me the filing system, Mara said. They pulled into the parking lane of the bridge on the east side, where the tourist barriers blocked headlights from below, and the foot traffic was 0 at 2:30 in the morning. Lila pulled the disk free. The sound and sensation of this were things Mara stored in a drawer in her mind and did not look at directly, and held it flat in both hands. The markings on its surface weren't random. Mara saw that immediately. They were structured. They had the logic of a ledger, header rows, data columns, something that functioned like an index. The luminescence shifted in response to Lila's touch, certain segments brightening, others dimming in the way that said, here is the active record, and here is the archive. These sections, Lila said, tracing specific rows, atmospheric data, resource concentration maps, population density models, strategic value indices. Mara set her briefcase on the hood and opened it. Inside, between the tax files and the secondary calculator, was a portable drive she used for client backups. She looked at it, looked at the disk. I need something to write with, she said. Layla produced, from somewhere in her wrong-seamed jacket, a tool that looked nothing like a pen, but that Mara accepted with the calm of someone who had already filed this situation under columns without names. The resource concentration maps, Mara said. What are they actually showing? The locations of rare mineral deposits. Lithium concentrations, palladium, yttrium. What do they look like when the readings are off? When the survey has an error? Like any data error, the values would be internally inconsistent. The cross-references to depth and geological age would not align. Good. Mara bent over the disk. Tell me where the depth cross-reference index is. It took 18 minutes. She knew, because she watched the clock on her phone and let the watching of it be the only acknowledgement she made of how much time the Chevrolet had to find them. She had done it in tax records more times than she liked to count. Not her own errors, never her own, but other people's. The ones that came to her after the fact with the panicked look of someone who knew they'd been in a vehicle that went over a guardrail and wasn't sure yet how far the drop was. She knew what a record looked like when it had been carefully built to pass inspection, while quietly not saying what it seemed to say. She'd reversed that process once to fix a problem for a client. Now she was building one. The atmospheric data became 17% richer in carbon compounds than it actually was. The water table readings shifted half a kilometer in every direction. The mineral concentrations scattered. She moved the high-value deposits to seismically active zones where extraction would be prohibitively dangerous, and then she cross-referenced them to depth profiles that made no geological sense, the kind of error that looked like instrument drift and was almost impossible to flag without physically resurveying. The population density models she touched last. She thought for a moment about what those numbers meant, what the board would use them for, what column they went into on whatever ledger the Gautier construct had been building for 91 years, and then she redistributed the concentrations to the coasts, crowded the habitable zones until the models suggested an extraction operation would be structurally cost-prohibitive before it generated returns. She saved the authentication structure exactly as she'd found it. Done, she said. Lila stared at the disk and then at Mara with those flat, light-filled eyes. You just made this planet look worthless. I made it look like a risky investment with negative margins, which is a different thing. The first one makes people angry. The second one makes accountants tell boards to pass. Mara closed her briefcase. Put it back. The sound of the disk going back was still a sound she stored in the drawer. But Lila straightened, and the wound on her collarbone was no longer bleeding light, and she looked at Mara with an expression that was working through something it didn't have a previous experience to measure against. Then the Chevrolet's headlights swept across the bridge from the west ramp. The Gautier construct stepped out first. He was tall, thin in the way that suggested it was a choice rather than a condition, the way old men in very expensive suits were thin, deliberately, as a statement of control. His face was the face of a man who had decided 91 years ago that he was finished with the inconvenience of dying, and it showed in the set of his mouth. Not cruel, exactly. Just out of patience with things that had not yet figured out what he had figured out. Von Toller came out the passenger side. Renault, the third, stayed at the wheel. The record, Gautier said. His voice had the same quality as the Chevrolet's engine, something installed rather than grown. I will not do you the insult of explaining why you'll give it to me. You're a bright woman. You've already calculated the outcomes. I've calculated them, Mara agreed. Then you know that your actions tonight, admirable, inventive, very human, change nothing. The record exists. It will be reviewed. The process will proceed. The record exists, Mara said. That's true. Something flickered in his face. Not doubt. He had probably not experienced doubt in several decades, but its technical equivalent, the brief pause of a system encountering unexpected input. He looked at Layla. He looked at Mara. He looked at her briefcase. What did you do? I did some accounting work. Mara kept her voice at the same temperature she used to use when a client came in furious about a bill she had correctly calculated, and she needed them to understand the mathematics without making them feel stupid. Level, patient. The voice of someone who has looked at all the numbers and knows what they say. The record is intact. The authentication signature is intact. Your board will receive it, review it, and determine that this planet is a negative return proposition. You cannot have altered the record. The authentication covers the container, not the values inside it. A pause. You've been doing this for 91 years. That's the flaw in long programs. After a while, you stop stress testing the assumptions. You assume that whoever you're dealing with can't do what you don't think to prevent. The long pause that followed was inhabited by the sound of the river below and, somewhere, a barge horn going through the dark. Von Toller looked at Gautier. The question in it was clear even across species, and the difference between a person and whatever Von Toller had become. The record can be resurveyed, Gautier said. Not within your acquisition window, Layla told me. Mara picked up her briefcase. 3 years of work. The window closes. You'd have to start over. He looked at her for a long time. 91 years is long enough to learn patience, but it is also long enough to accumulate a certain kind of fatigue. The fatigue of always having been the smartest presence in the room, of having designed every system, of having calculated every outcome. The fatigue of never having been surprised. She watched him do the calculation. She watched the columns add up. Von Toller was already walking back toward the car. Gautier stood a moment longer, looking at her with something that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite anger and was its own category. The one you ended up in after 91 years when something new happened. You understand, he said, that we will be back. The window closes. Another opens eventually. I know, Mara said, but I've seen what happens when you hand people the data and the time to prepare. Give us 40 years and we'll have opinions about where you park.
He got in the car.
The Chevrolet reversed off the bridge, turned without headlights, and its engine, that wet breathing sound, faded until it was nothing, until it was just the river and the amber lights and the two of them standing on the bridge at 2:53 in the morning. Layla sat on the bridge railing with her legs dangling over the water and pressed her palm flat to her collarbone. The wound had stopped leaking light. 40 years is not accurate, she said. The next resource window opens in approximately 63 years. I know, I was being conservative. Mara set her briefcase down and leaned against the railing beside her. The city on both sides of the river was quiet in the particular way. Cities were quiet at 3 in the morning, not empty, just resting, everything under a low hum of preparation for the next day. Will you tell them, your review body? They will know the acquisition was delayed without explanation. They will investigate. Lila tilted her face up toward the sky, and something in her expression changed. Not her eyes, those stayed the same, but the tension around her mouth shifted into something that might have been the absence of fear, which is not the same as relaxation, but was adjacent to it. I will be asked what happened. I will report accurately, and they'll believe you. that a mild-mannered accountant corrupted an alien survey record on a bridge in the middle of the night. Lila looked at her sideways. The blue-white light was doing something quieter now, like a screen turned down. "I was not expecting you," she said. "I want you to know that." I had calculated outcomes for 17 scenarios when the scooter was disabled. None of them included a human standing in the right place at the right time and understanding what to do. "I wasn't standing in the right place," Mara said. "I was standing outside a pharmacy at 2 in the morning because I worked too late and I wanted cold medicine." Yes, a beat, and yet, Mara thought about that for a while. Below them, the river ran steady and indifferent over whatever it ran over. Old stones, old rubbish, the patient archaeology of a city that had been exactly here for a very long time. "Can you get back?" she asked. "To wherever you need to get back to. The scooter's navigation core is salvageable. If I can reach it before the city's waste management system does." A pause that had something wry inside it. "I have done harder things tonight," Mara laughed. It came out a little rough, the laugh of someone who had been operating on very compressed fear for several hours and was letting the valve off slowly. Leela looked at the laugh with the expression of someone who had categorized it, understood it, and then, in a way that seemed to cost her something, allowed herself a version of her own. They sat on the bridge for a while longer, not talking. The city breathed around them. Somewhere a tram started its first run. The scooter was 3 alleys from where they'd started, tipped against a skip bin. The jet propulsion unit cracked, but not irreparable. Lila crouched over it with the same tools she'd lent to Mara for the disc work and did something to the undercarriage that involved a sound like a wine glass, tuned very precisely. Mara stood nearby and held her briefcase in both hands. "One question," she said. "Yes, the data I put in the record, the false readings. If anyone from your side actually surveys this planet carefully, it will be apparent immediately." Lila looked up. "The corrupted record closes the acquisition window and delays the process. It does not prevent future assessment. 63 years, approximately." Mara nodded. "Then you should probably let someone know. Whatever your review body is, whoever contests acquisitions, they should have accurate data too." She reached into her briefcase, passed the tax files, and held up the portable drive. "I made a copy before I started. The real data, unaltered. So there's a record of what this place actually is." Lila stood up slowly. "You kept a copy," she said. "I'm an accountant. I always keep a copy." Mara held the drive out. "Give it to the right people. The ones who look at what a place is and think about whether something that's living there ought to be told it's being looked at." A beat. We probably should have been told years ago. Leela took the drive. She looked at it in her palm for a moment, and then she looked at Mara, and the expression on her face was one that Mara didn't have a name for and suspected wasn't one that human faces made. Something that had decided something. "My name is not actually Deluxe," she said. "That is a translation artifact. The nearest equivalent in your language is, approximately, cartographer. The one who maps the territories. That's a heavy name to carry." "Yes." She folded the drive carefully into her jacket. "I have been mapping for 11 years. I have surveyed 43 systems. I have filed reports on which worlds are worth taking." The silence that followed was the weight of a specific kind of moment, the kind where what someone says next either builds something or doesn't. "And now?" Mara asked. Leela looked at the drive where it sat in her pocket. Then she looked at the city around them, the streets just starting to show the first gray of morning light, the pharmacy sign still buzzing orange, the bridge amber and patient over the water. "Now I have a copy of accurate data," she said, "and a review body who will ask me to testify about what I found here." She didn't say what she would testify to. She didn't need to. The scooter left a faint blue-white trace in the air above the alley, and then it was gone, up through the gap between buildings, past the level of the orange pharmacy sign, past the level of the rooftops, and then it was just the sky doing what the sky did. Mara stood in the alley for a minute, maybe 2. Then she picked up her briefcase, walked out to the street, and turned toward home. It was a 20-minute walk, and she knew every step of it. She knew which blocks had broken streetlights, and which had the good coffee smell coming from the bakeries that started before dawn. And she knew the shortcut through the park that only worked in summer when the gate was unlocked. And she knew the sound her building's front door made when it opened, and the exact number of stairs. 41. Up to her apartment. She was halfway up those stairs when the thing she hadn't let herself think about the whole night finally came forward. 43 systems. 43 worlds assessed, filed, reported on. And this one, This one with its bakery starting before dawn, and its patients rivers and its accountants walking home too late. This one had been in a column marked viable until 45 minutes ago. She stopped on the 22nd stair, stood there in the close dark of the stairwell, and let that breathe. Then she thought about the copy of the drive and where it was going, and what would happen when Layla Cartographer sat in front of a review body and testified about what she'd found on a bridge at 3 in the morning in a city by a river on a planet that had, in 43 surveys worth of professional assessment, apparently not been expected to fight back. She finished the stairs. She filed her client reports the next morning from the kind of exhaustion that was quieter than tired, the kind that sat behind the eyes and watched. She drank 2 coffees and caught herself 3 times, staring out the window at the city with a different expression than the one she usually wore when she stared out windows. On the 3rd time, she stopped staring and wrote an email to a colleague who worked in regulatory research, the kind of colleague who knew about treaty frameworks and international oversight bodies. She wrote, "I have a question about what the procedure is when a transaction has been found to be based on fraudulent data." Hypothetically, she hit send. Then she opened the next tax file and got back to work. 63 years. Or 62 years and 360 some odd days. By the time the next resource window opened and the acquisition board convened again and the new survey request went through whatever the acquisition board's bureaucratic channels were. 62 years for the human race to figure out that it was being looked at. To build something that could answer back. To learn enough about where the Chevrolets came from that the next time one came around a corner with its headlights off, someone would be waiting for it. Mara didn't know if 62 years was enough. She didn't know if anything would come of the drive, or the testimony, or the email to the regulatory colleague. She had been an accountant for 11 years, and she understood better than most people that the outcomes of good faith interventions in complex systems were not guaranteed, and were frequently not apparent within any timeline that felt satisfying. What she knew was the number. What she knew was the column the drive was now sitting in, and the review body it was going to, and the difference between a world that had been seen and a world that was only being assessed. She knew what it meant to have a record, a real one, the one that showed what was actually there, not just what someone needed to find in order to move forward. She filed her client's quarterly returns. She found a small, clean error in a logistics firm's inventory reconciliation that saved them a penalty. She ate lunch at her desk. At 3 in the afternoon, the coffee shop on the corner put out its sidewalk chalkboard, and the city went on doing what the city did, and the river below the Amber Bridge ran over its old stones, patient and specific, under a sky that was ordinary on its surface and had other things going on underneath, like it always had, like everything did, when you knew where to look. She looked up from her screen once, at the window at the ordinary sky. Then she looked back at her work, and she ran the numbers.